Hello, this is Dr. Laura Davis, and this is part 2 of my discussion of Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion. We are talking about book 2. And I'd like to start talking about Patrick at the moment that he becomes a tanner. So we've seen Patrick through the book, the protagonist of the book. He's taken on many roles, right? So we have him at the beginning. He's a child in the opening scene. He's watching these skaters across, it's in rural Ontario, in a very rural setting. He's watching these skaters with the cattails on fire skating. He knows they speak a different language. They are immigrants that are coming that are loggers and do labor, and his father is a dynamiter, of course. He becomes a dynamiter in the waterworks, we know from the beginning of part 1, and then here we get the information that he gets a job at a tannery. He is also, we've found in the previous book, in book 1, he's become what he calls a searcher. Now, I think that term searcher can refer to Patrick through the entire book, and in some ways I think is the character perhaps most aligned with Michael Ondaatje himself, the author, because like Michael Ondaatje, Patrick also follows these little clues and these little kind of archival details to search, to be that searcher and to find out things about the people around him. And so too, Ondaatje is doing that. He's digging into the archives to learn about the history of the building of Toronto, for example, the Bloor Street Viaduct and the waterworks. So Patrick now becomes a tanner at a tannery. So this would be a place where skins of animals are made into leather. And there's quite a bit of talk about his job as a tanner in and around page 129 to about 130 or 132. This section really reminds me of Ondaatje's poem called The Cinnamon Peeler, with some of the things he says about the smells of the tannery, how the smells stay on the men, the women, their wives would smell them later and know the jobs they're working in. This is very similar to the cinnamon peeler, so there's definitely some parallels there. And at one point on page 130, Ondaatje describes these tanners with these skins coming over them out of the building. And he says the men and the skin, he says they had leapt into different colors as if into different countries. So they're kind of leaping into these skins. Again, I see the idea of that mask or that performance, which again relates to the title of the novel, In the Skin of a Lion, right? They are taking on these different skins, different colors, different identities in a sense. And so in this section, we also get more about Alice. So we have found that Patrick reunites with Alice because he meets her at the puppet show, where she in fact is the puppet that he's mesmerized by. He has met her before, of course, through his friend Clara, who he came across when he was searching for Ambrose. So Patrick's searches keep being displaced, right? First, he is searching for Ambrose to try and get the money. Then that is displaced onto Clara because he falls in love with Clara, but he can't have Clara. She goes back to her lover, Ambrose, still not telling Patrick where he is, although, of course, Patrick does find him, and we know what happens there at the end of book 1. Then he finds Alice through the Waterworks Union political protest and party, the illegal party at the waterworks, where he goes to the puppet show, and then he starts to be with Alice, and he meets her young daughter Hannah, who's 9 years old. Interestingly, she becomes the main character one of the main characters in The English Patient. She's the nurse in The English Patient, but in this book, she is only 9 years old. And of course, this book is the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s. English Patient takes place during World War II, so Hannah would have grown up into her 20s by then. So when he's hanging out, basically, with Alice and Hannah, Hannah shows him some photographs. And these photographs end up being clues as to who Alice is, because as Patrick keeps saying, Alice won't open up about her past. She has this kind of mysterious past. Kind of an interesting parallel to something like the diviners that we studied, where Morag has this, according to Brooke anyway, mysterious past. He doesn't want to hear it. In this case, it's kind of the opposite. Patrick wants to know about her past, but she doesn't talk about her past, so he really doesn't know who she is. But when Hannah shows Patrick these pictures of Hannah as a baby, and they're talking about Cato, who is Alice's deceased husband and Hannah's father. He was murdered during a Union protest in 1921. And that was right before Hannah was born. So Alice was already pregnant with Hannah when her husband Cato was born. And of course, this is why Alice becomes such an activist, because she lost her husband to the cause, and she wants to continue on that cause and help the workers that are not being paid enough and are being exploited in these very dangerous situations, such as the construction of the Bloor Street Viaduct and the construction of the waterworks. So she's become very involved in union politics. So Cato, Patrick, the searcher that he is, wants to find out more about Cato. He wants to find out more about Alice. So he takes this photograph, and he's got another couple of clues that Hannah showed him. One is a rosary of Alice's, and another is a sumac bracelet. So he starts to wonder what Alice's past is. And he sees one of the photographs that Hannah gives him shows a scene that's familiar to us as readers. It's a scene that the book started with, or not right at the beginning, but near the beginning, with the bridge and the nun having fallen off the bridge. So there's a picture of these workers on the Bloor Street Viaduct. And of course, Patrick would be wondering, well, what does this have to do with Alice? So he takes that photo to the Riverside Library, again, very much parallel to, I think, Ondaatje, searching for archival tidbits for the book. And he wants to find out, why Alice might have this picture, who these people are. And that leads him to Nicholas Temelkoff, because he is in the archives and other pictures with regard to that situation. And there's the newspaper articles about him having captured the nun. So basically what happens is he eventually finds out, he puts the pieces together through this, that Alice, in fact, was the nun that Nicholas had caught. He goes to find Nicholas, who's now working in a bakery. And I love the scene where he's like kind of juggling almost his dough balls and in very Nicholas Temelkoff manner. And again, a kind of performance. But he finds out that he figures out that Alice was the nun. Remember, there was the parrot in the pub where he took her, where Temelkoff took the nun, and the parrot, and Alice wouldn't talk, but the parrot's name was Alicia, and so that's the name she took. And so Patrick puts two and two together and figures that out. He then also figures out from the pictures that Cato was one of the people that held cattails and skated along the river. He discovers this through a conversation with Alice. So now we get another perspective on his childhood view. So as a child, he saw these strangers, immigrants, skating along the river with these cattails who spoke a different language, as his father was the dynamiter, but he never knew who they were. They were strangers. And so when he finds out that Cato was one of them, he says, oh, they were Finns, because he knows Cato was a Finn. And then he starts to see and understand Cato's perspective, not from the perspective of the childhood boy outsider that he was, but from Alice's perspective, who knew and lived with him. So that is pretty much it for book 2 for my discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.